Games, board games. I might be talking about board games, but I'm not gonna shout. Starting off this streaming with a little bit of singing, and I'm going to talk about the mechanism that is acting, and I'll talk about what it is. It's unclear, but the term persists. Acting on Board Game Geek, it's what I'm talking about. I'm starting a new series about all the board game mechanisms, and I'm not gonna shout. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good whatever it is, wherever you are. I am Bez. It is 10 a.m.-ish UK time for Bezzy Beats and Board Game Blether. And what am I doing today? I am pondering mechanics and acting. What does it mean in the board game context, which is unclear? I'll explain what this is all about. And yeah, how did Geoff Engelstein and Isaac Shalev define this mechanism? Well, they technically didn't in their book. How does it impact the game? Well, it massively. How will it affect the experience of the game? Massively. How versatile is it? Very much so, potentially too versatile. And we'll talk about all sorts of stuff, but yeah, and I'm just going to get into what this is all about. But before I do that, let me try and introduce this. So what's this all about? Well, on Board Game Geek, there's all these mechanisms which I'm highlighting right now. So there's quite a few. I think that I checked and there were 190 nope, I've lost it. I think there were like almost 200. There's quite a lot of them anyway. And I think these are the building blocks of tabletop game design, hence the name of the book that was written. Building blocks of tabletop game design. Boom. And the key thing is that there's, by understanding what is possible within games, we can better understand how to put these elements together. And so that's what I'm trying to do for myself. And hopefully you will learn something along the way. So I've done a tiny bit of research, looked at a bunch of games, and this particular mechanism, it's very unclear. It's badly, if we go here, it says games with acting mechanic require players to use some form of mime or mimicry to communicate with other players. Charades is probably the poster child for this mechanic, where one member of a team must use non-verbal clues to allow the other members to guess the solution. Well, not only does it go out with acting and delve into pictures or words or assembling picture elements together for communication restrictions, but also it delves into role-playing, and then it also delves into some judge-based games. This is possibly one of the worst categorized mechanics on Board Game Geek, frankly. And so I think that it's a little bit of a weird place to start, but hey-ho, let's crack on. But first of all, I do want to go through the regular sections. Recent highlights, living life and seeing the sights. Recent highlights, playing games and other delights. Recent highlights. What have you been up to recently? Personally, just to catch you up, the last day I've sent out, I think yesterday I sent out Kickstarter backer surveys. That was pretty much it. I did a wee bit of that, and I did a wee bit of preparation for this. Enjoyed my game of Dice Hospital Emergency Roll, that was good fun. Been thinking about, some designs that I'm working on, and I took the evening off. Visited a friend to give them some stuff, some blank cards actually, because they're sick, and allow them to make games. So, recent highlights: had a nice walk, had some nice chicken. I just finished some orange and mango juice that was tasty, and yeah, red chips, all good. So, brilliant thing. What's a little thing which is brilliant? I would like to say why acting is brilliant, because acting cuts into the heart of what it is to be human. When we talk about acting, I mean, again, this is an incredibly vague and badly categorized thing. I'll get into that in a minute. But yeah, acting, when we speak as ourselves, but quite often people talk about wearing a mask. You have a different role, whether you're applying for a job, whether that job is something in the creative industry, whether it's for an office job, whether it's to be a solicitor, whether you're talking to someone and trying to seduce them, whether you're trying to entertain someone, whether you're trying to cheer someone up, or whether you're trying to like, all of this is acting, and like, acting cuts into the heart of what it is to be human. Sure, thinking about the mathematical constructs is incredibly valuable, but I think there's something, mathematical games are a big thing, and I'm not saying that we need less of them, but what I am saying is that I would love to see more games that are really subjective and emotional and cuts into the heart of what it is to be human, by allowing us to adopt these different masks and try to convey information in different ways. Anyway, I'll crack on with the main topic. As always, feel free to comment, ask questions, fun, like, follow. And so where's pondering mechanisms? So yes, why am I doing this? Because I think it's valuable. How was this defined? It is not actually part of this book. This book is basically for more strategic games. It's for Euro games, and I would say that it feels like when you look at a lot of board game books, whether it's Geoff Warrender's fantastic book about board game design or building blocks of tabletop game design, it feels like the people who are really into it and really into writing stuff are writing about strategic games, are writing about games where it's all about mathematics, but then there's not a lot of assessing of the different types of dexterity, the flicking, the pulling, the big body dexterity. What is acting? Why can't we get into solid talk about what this means? So, looking through all the linked games, so I think I organized it by rank, which gives you an idea of what is popular on Board Game Geek at least. So we've got, let me make that a wee bit bigger. We've got a lot of games, frankly, where so we've got monikers, Time's Up, Dixit. These are, yes, about the communication restrictions, but then when Dixit comes out, that's not using mind, that's using a short phrase. Spyfall, is that acting? It feels like the only sense of acting is that the only communication restriction is you don't want to give too much away. That's a really weird thing to call a communication restriction. 2 rooms and a boom. If that's acting, it's only acting in the other form of being role-playing, building a shared narrative, and putting yourself in there. Now, let's go through some of the games that I talked about. So we've got acting as a pitch for the judge. So here we've got Channel A, and people make up different TV shows. They have to talk about it and they have to explain it. There's similar things like the big idea, where you might be acting, you might do a little bit of a pitch and you say, this is the thing and you should all back this, and this is the best TV show ever and you want to get this. Now, this is kind of a communication restriction in that you have your own tiny bits of time, but really it's, yeah, pitch. And I'm going to say that for me, this is not really acting. I only included it because there were so many games that were categorized as acting that came up in this. There were also like at least 10 games that was like, this is not acting in any sense. And half of them I was like trying to edit it. So then we go to the acting as role-playing, building a shared narrative. So you've got I, Dark Overlord, where the little goblins are trying to say, no, I didn't do it. And the Dark Overlord is saying, which one of you took away my pet Minotaur and didn't feed the humans properly? And they build up. Now, I think that when we talk about acting as role-playing, the key thing is that there's a one-to-one correlation between what your character does and what you are doing. It has to essentially be some sort of LARP for at least a moment. Now, a lot of games would be outside the scope of Board Game Geek. So, of course, role-playing games. Now, I'm going to say that for me, if you could play Dungeons and Dragons without acting. I don't know if anyone would, but if rather than ever saying your lines of dialogue, you talk about what your character says, you might say, oh, my character approaches and asks for a drink, and oh, my character greets the human, my character, and raises their fist. And certainly when you're in the combat, that's describing rather than acting. But with the one-to-one dialogue, like, it reminds me of Braggart, where, yes, you spread out your story. I, Dark Overlord, it encourages you to do, given the rules of the game, you will do directly what your character is doing. And then even further, Cash and Guns Live, which is a live version, essentially a LARPy version of Cash and Guns. And so you've got people wandering around, pointing guns at each other. And yeah, again, this is kind of blurring the thing between board games and role-playing. Are you playing for a strategic victory? Are you playing to further the narrative? Can it be both? Can they coexist? I mean, sure, something like Gloom, where you have the storytelling mixed in with everything else. But this is, I understand why people call it acting, and this was like the second most popular categorization, if you can call it that. But then we've got Ooga Booga, which is kind of acting in that you're meant to be doing a tribal chant, but it's really just it's really just a memory game. And then Tarantella Tango, which is a game of quick thinking and working out which noise to make, but then because you're impersonating an animal, they call it acting. No, fundamentally, it is, as was mentioned, communication restriction. So how do you communicate? How do you restrict the communication? You've got a whole bunch of methods. You might have limited words. You might have pictures. You might have inflection of what you're saying, noises or gestures. And you might have a finite set of actions that you can do. Again, gestures, actions, but in Octet, you are telling people how to build a small thing, but then you need to hit them or say particular words from an incredibly small vocabulary. in order to get them to make the thing. In Imagine, you're trying to communicate ideas. What is this job? I was gazing at this and thinking, okay, maybe this is hypnotist, I don't know. And semi-transparent cards go on top of each other, and we're making different things, and the front cover does a perfect job of showing you what is going on and what you can do. And then you put all of these icons together to build a vocabulary to try to communicate. Now, that's the thing. Like, I just can't get over how bad a term acting is. It's communication restrictions. Call it communication restrictions, because that is what it is. And you know what? This is not acting. I mean, if someone who was not into board games called this acting, I'd be thinking, what are you talking about? I mean, sure, this is interesting. This is like, I pulled up Scott Rogers' game, Pantone, where you've got different colors and each card is only one color, and then you put them together to create different things. And yeah, anyway. So for the rest of this show, I am just going to call this whole mechanism communication restrictions, because that's a far better name. And I'm not going to perpetuate this terrible, terrible name, acting. No, sorry. I refuse to do it. So, communication restrictions. You've got, fundamentally, the poster childs are, yes, charades, no speaking, movement. People learn this language. You've got Pictionary, the drawing, no speech, just drawing. You've got a limited number of words with the taboo style. You can say any words, but not those ones. Now, if we go back to the main thing, monikers, Time's Up, the top 3, in fact, are all basically the same game. The same public domain games known as celebrities, where you have repeated rounds. And the interesting thing about communication restrictions is that you build a shared vocabulary. So here you might be first saying anything you want, but not the word. So I would tell you, okay, this is someone who sang, and their name is not the queen, not the king, the child of that person. Come on, it's the singer. And someone would shout Prince. And yeah, I could have done like Purple Rain. And then maybe next round, we are aware of what's in the box, so we know what we're going to talk about. And then I'm only allowed one word, so I might say king, and then people remember, and people say Prince. And then in the last round, it might be like that, because you're only allowed gestures. And this cycle of going through things over and over, this building up of a vocabulary, is the kind of thing that you enjoy. It's managing to overcome the restrictions, managing to overcome the obstacles. And as you do it over and over, the restrictions go up and you feel more accomplished. It's fantastic. Now, we've talked about limited words, pictures in terms of charades, or indeed pre-printed pictures that you combine. You might talk about inflection. There is a game where you need to guess the mood of the people. You might talk about noises. My own game, a game about, I think it's on like page 2 or 3, which was, no, it's definitely not on page 2. A game about wee whimsical creatures and trying to identify them after someone makes noises. There we go, which was quite a nice thing to see. So here, you're trying to communicate which of these creatures it was, but you're only allowed to use noises. So no charades, people have to close their eyes, and indeed, no words. So using these noises, which of these things is it? And noises alone is not something that we've used a lot of. I think that certainly noise is something we could go further in. And gestures. I mean, obviously we've got charades, but then limited actions. Now, how does this impact the game? Communication restrictions, that's what we're talking about. How will it affect the experience at the table? Massively. As soon as you, it's one of those things like negotiation or trading, but even more so, as soon as you put it into the game, I believe that this is what the game has to be about. If, at least that's what I thought. But then, could you not argue that saying you're not allowed to give this particular sort of information is a communication restriction? Like, and I'm talking somewhat about cooperative games here. I am talking somewhat about team games, hidden traitor games. Hanabi, you cannot speak. You cannot say which of these things, which card is which number. You have to say all the cards of one number, or all the cards of a color. Morning, Ian. I hope you're doing well. Just chatting about communication restrictions. And yeah, exactly, like 2 of your cards are 4, but you do actually point at the specific ones. Now, Hanabi, and also the mind where you're not allowed to talk at all, and your only communication is the timing. I would say that these games, even though they aren't party games, even though they feel very different to the Time's Up, Pantone, Imagine, charades style games that we're talking about, similarly, it does push it into a similar feel. If you count 1 to 100 at a regular rate in your head, that's really messing up the game. It has to be about, yeah, I'm not going to get bogged down with any particular game, but the fundamental point that I'm trying to make is that communication restrictions massively flavor the game. And some traitor games try to bring in communication restrictions to say you can't say the exact number in your hand, which then boils down to someone saying, well, it's really, really, really high, or it's really, really low, but it's not the lowest it could be, but it's almost there. And then it's like, okay, well, it's either a 2 or a 3. And I think that communication restrictions have to be clear. I think that, not sure what you mean by this comment, Ian. I do apologize, but please clarify if you're able. Communication restrictions have to be clear. It has to be clear whether you've judged it correctly or not. Poetry for Neanderthals, exploding kittens. You're able to say anything you want, but every word can only be 1 syllable. So if I said, drink out of this, drink in this lid on top, then what would you say? And yeah, of it, lid on top, screw lid on, and that it's one syllable per word. I mean, maybe I'm not communicating it the best because Ian's going for cup, and that's not what I'm trying to get you to guess. Thermos, no, for the record, it was just bottle. It was just bottle. But anyway, that's poetry for Neanderthals, and that's a really clear thing. Ian says, I know that communication can be hampered by something like that, like metagaming. Why? That's a really good point, and I think that again gets back to when we think about it. Yeah, if people are willing to avoid the things that you can do in the mind, or the things that you can do in Shadows over Camelot, of kind of metagaming it and saying, this is the highest, I've got a really, really good card. It's not quite the best that it could be, but it's really, 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 really good. And you're not allowed to say the number, but hopefully by now you know that I'm talking about an 8 or 9, or I might be saying, oh, this is somewhere in the middle, but it's more in the higher part of the middle, so I'm feeling quite good about it, but not brilliant. And like, you establish a language, and that's problematic. And so communication restrictions, I think, to work well, they have to be not susceptible to this kind of stuff. I can start a fight if someone can carry it on. Do you mean that you would get angry at someone at the table if someone was doing that, Ian? Not sure. Yeah, what you mean, but maybe. So, whatever you've got, the communication restrictions, games are about being with people. Games are about, yes, having that shared moment. When humans are together, generally we like to communicate, sometimes about other things. Like in bridge, that is a game with a massive communication restriction. And in bridge, you can only communicate using your bids, and it's not as if you've built up this secret language, because if you build up a secret language or invent your own system, you've got to tell it to the other team. Those are the rules of bridge. But people tend to go with one of the established routines of saying, okay, well, I'll say this, but this is my bid. But actually what this bid means is that I have a lot of hearts in my hand. And then you're trying to give information via that. And you're not allowed to talk about the game, but you are allowed to talk about other, obviously, parts of your life. And so I would say that communication restrictions, it's almost cutting through what the normal metagaming thing is. Because normally when I play the game and I say, let's say we're playing a game where it's an auction game. Now, am I allowed to negotiate in this auction game? Am I allowed to say, if you, only 2 of us want this, and if you don't bid, I will not bid for the next 2 things, so you will get it more cheaply. I mean, are you allowed to make a deal with that? Because that massively changes the game. And some people have a sort of implicit, no, you're not allowed to do that, that's too far. Some people are like, yeah, bring it on. We want to get into that negotiation. Communication restrictions say this part that quite often people don't even consider, that's left up to the group. This is what we're cutting to. This is what the game is going to be all about. It is incredibly versatile. Ian says, I've seen that done in games like Power Grid, where, yeah, people negotiating and trying to give other people options and saying, okay, you get this one, I'll get the next one, or whatever. And communication restrictions are versatile. But because it is such a big thing, I would give it 3 out of, well, it can be presented in lots of different ways. As we've said, we've got the limited words, pictures, inflections, the noises, the gestures, all of the different things. And I'm sure that there's more things to come as well. But yeah, I'm trying to, yeah, who would win is not part of this whole discussion. But in terms of adding it to other stuff, can you? Yes. The one game that I found that I was really, really interested by, I don't know if you've heard of Treasure Ready Go. This is essentially a communication restriction game where you've got to get people to guess a certain number of objects, but before the time runs out. But you might get them to guess just one, and then it's okay, that's good. Now, if you want them to guess to keep going, you can, but as soon as the timer runs out, you lose everything. So the question is, at what point do you stop taking cards? Do you take another card with only 5 seconds left on the clock to say, and get them to guess sheep? I've not actually played this game, just to make that clear. So lots of this stuff is just based on what half reading a review if one existed. Most of these games I couldn't find the instructions, but push your luck mixed with that. That's really interesting. And then we've got like bluffing can be part of the communication, but that's not what I would call a communication restriction. I would say that a game like Werewolf or One Night's Ultimate Werewolf or Mafia or any of those types of things, those are not communication restriction games, because any restriction that is imposed is self-imposed based on other criteria. Hello, Runa. It is lovely to see you. Thank you for joining me. I'm talking about communication restrictions today. And I just want to talk about, because Ian brought it up, one of the David Serlin games where it's one versus many. The many are allowed to communicate however they want, but then if the one finds out the information that the many are trying to communicate, then that becomes a problem. So things like, frankly, I would say that Spyfall should not be on this list, because Spyfall, a fake artist in New York, you're only communicating via the line. And Chameleon, frankly, is more of a communication restriction because you only have that one word to say. But Spyfall, you can ask any question. You can say anything you want. And the communication restrictions that you feel as a player are imposed by your desires. So it's not a direct communication restriction. And I think that's a massive difference that I just want to address. Is that the game where you don't know your own cards, but you do know the other people's cards and then need to do a fireworks show? One of those games? I lost its name. Hanabi. Hanabi, yes, I absolutely believe, personally, that Hanabi is a communication restriction game. I don't know whether Board Game Geek lists it as such, and I'm actually going to look it up. So, see, this is the thing. I'm technically talking about acting, and here we've got communication limits, which is a separate thing. And this all came from acting. So it turns out that we are going to readdress this later on with communication limits. And so honestly, my conclusion is that this is just a really badly named mechanism. And yeah, I'm glad that there's people. Thank you for being so helpful, Ian. Look, when you're acting, and let's actually just go with the big movement. just to keep it a bit more on points, insight, just realised that we're going to talk about communication restrictions later on. Under the guise of communication limits, which then has Gloomhaven and Arkham Horror, the card game. That feels a bit weird. I didn't think that Gloomhaven or Arkham Horror, the card game, has communication limits. Correct me if I'm... But I guess that's, investigation for another day. Look, I think that we could mix this with other mechanisms, for sure. When we look at what exists, yes, it flavors the game, and I think that because acting is such a joyous, fun activity, you don't want to mix it with too much. You don't want to have like action points or action drafting, or sure, you might have a dexterity option and then some sort of acting, I don't know, and you might have some voting, but I think that games with this aspect are going to tend to be lower. You might have a memory acting game where you see some things, you flip them over and shuffle the deck. And frankly, I would argue that Time's Up, Monikers, does have a memory system. That is such a big part of the game. People don't think of it as a memory game, but it 100% is, because the whole crux of that game is in the memory, in the player's shared narrative. Although, then what's a memory game? Anyway, just one. Yeah, like that's... And again, we get into communication limits. Anyway, so when is it good? Who would enjoy it? I think that people looking for something more lighthearted, people looking for something, it's normally appeals to more extroverted people. I talked to a massive mass market publisher who said that they definitely would not print a game about whimsical creatures and trying to identify them after some noises, because the notion of trying to make those noises puts you, like, sets you apart for a moment. It makes people think, oh, everyone's looking at me, and maybe they're not super comfortable with that. And they said that they would frankly not print charades. And charades, it's interesting to note that you've got reverse charades, where instead of one person on the team acting and then everyone else guessing, you've got a version where everyone else is acting and then one person is guessing. And so flipping it around, presumably they thought that, guessing, it feels like less intense, it feels like less pressure. And so that's a point. It does put pressure on the players, especially when it is closer to what I would call acting. The charades, the noises, the singing, and to go back to the, if we were really to do it, then frankly Pantone and Imagine would not be acting games. And I just keep coming back to the point that like acting is really badly defined. Anyway, when's it bad? What issues might there be when adding it to a game? Well, I've already talked about the fact that it's just really overwhelming. I think it's going to flavor all types of games, and people who are more extroverted will enjoy it. It pushes people to do something they don't normally do, which can be great fun, because when else would I try to be a conductor on a train and like point people and go, oh, and then move people? And there's a joy of getting out of your body. But if you are shy, if you're retiring, and if you're the only person doing it, and I find it's interesting that by having people close their eyes when one person's making a noise, or that kind of lessens the inhibition slightly, and also by having multiple people do something together, which is an interesting point. Like there should probably be more games about people doing things together. Like there's one about many people making a noise at once that came out this year, but Then the last question I want to ask is, have I used it in any of my games? This is a list of questions I'm going to ask for all the mechanisms. And yes, as you saw here, my mechanism is on page 3, rated 7.6, rank 8,285. Not the highest rank, but given it was Golden Geek nominated, which I'm quite chuffed by. I'm actually going to go there. And yeah, 2021 Golden Geek Best Party Game nominee. I'm really chuffed about that. But yes, and let me finish up with my own photo. Why not? If you've got any comments, questions, whatever, then really please do ask at this point, because that's the end of what I have to say. And having a conversation is the reason that I do live streams, rather than just talking to myself without the video camera rolling. Ian says, what about a game where one person gets to peek at an item or card and then has access to knowledge and can choose to do what they will with that? Well, asymmetric information is not a communication restriction. No, that's definitely not acting. Like, we're talking about restrictions in communication, ideally something using your body but you're just talking about asymmetry in information. And again, to get back to repeat the point, if there were a game like Hanabi where I was, for example, if there were a game like Hanabi that some people you want them to get to know what's in their hand, but some people you don't want them to know what's in their hand, but you can say anything you want, and maybe it's a real-time game. I'm not sure exactly where this is going, but just imagine that it works, okay? Like hand wavy. That's not a communication restriction game, because sure, by the nature of the game, you might be trying to say things to one team. Like, there are games where you're trying to say things that will identify you to one person, but not another person. And sure, decrypto, that's kind of an act. I don't know whether it's acting. It's certainly communication limitation, but in a version where you had free reign to say any words you want, being limited in a self-imposed manner is 100% different. I think that's the key thing that I want to get across. Andruna says, isn't that the faith of a small streamer, talking to oneself, waiting for someone to say something back? Yeah, kind of. I mean, obviously it's nicer when people actually get involved in the discussion, and thank you for joining me today. Look, it's all good, it's acting. So let me... let me move towards the end and say, question of the day. Here's a little question before we go on our way. Question of the day, which is, so today, just to reiterate, we are talking about the acting mechanism. And so, as it's defined, games with the acting mechanic require players to use some form of mime or mimicry to communicate with the other players. Charades is probably the poster child for this mechanic, where one member of the team must use non-verbal clues to allow the other members to guess the solution. And my question is, when was the last time you acted? So not like about this, like just when was the last time that you feel like you really acted? Like whether as part of a game, whether as part of play, maybe it was work, maybe you're a professional actor, I don't know. Maybe you're part of the theater. When was the last time you acted? For me, I definitely Saturday. Yeah, like even for like 2 minutes, like maybe you gave a goofy voice, and Ian says, last night in my play rehearsal, amazing. And I am thinking Sunday last week, not yesterday, but 8 days ago, I was part of a LARP, so that was definitely a thing. And Runa says every other day I act normal. I love that. So every other day you act as yourself, and then every other day you act normal. Ian, I would love to see you, but it's just a wee bit. Maybe if you were like we were in the same city, I would consider it more strongly. Chameleon problems. Yeah, I totally get that. And so my second question actually for you is, do you feel like you're putting on a mask? Do you feel like you're generally acting a lot in real life? And that's my question for you. I feel like I generally am. I mean, but like it's a delicate question because there's definitely lots of rules that, like right now, if I'm not going to lie, if I wasn't streaming, I might just take this off, but I've got nothing on underneath. It is getting a bit warm, wearing a jumper, but yeah, I know I put on a mask. I have no idea how to take it off, to be honest. Also, depression problems. Yeah, I definitely know what you mean. Um, yeah, many hugs. I feel like only when people aren't around and when we aren't streaming, or sometimes maybe that's a chance to learn what we really appreciate and what we really do, but then it takes so long to kind of get back in touch with ourselves. It's really, really hard. And in the modern world we are seeing people constantly and we do want to interact with people. So like, if I was totally on my own, I frankly wouldn't be happy. But then when I'm with other people, there is part of me that's like, hey, am I enjoying this? But I'm getting better, I think, at just saying, hey, I'm enjoying this. Thank you. Let's keep doing it. And saying, oh, I would like that, and I don't like that. But it's also, in your mind, sometimes there's always the question of how can you communicate? And the mask doesn't have to be bad, says Runa. Saying, yeah, I am all right to someone you barely know is a perfect mask. The issue lies when you do it with your friends. Yeah, 100%. Ian says, I did all the voices for the Bureau of Investigation at Expo. Wearing that mask gets tiring, though, says Ian. Oh, yes, says Runa. Oh, yes, I agree. 100%. Anyway, so that was the question of the day. So over to you. What are you up to? You can share button if you want to. So what are you up to today? What are you up to after this? And do you have plans? Do you have things that you're looking forward to? Things that you need to do? Something fun and frivolous? Something super serious? Let me know. Please do share. I promise that I care. Today, I do not have anything planned. I am going to try and do some life admin. I'm going to try and wash some clothes. No, I'm not going to try. Like Yoda, there is do or do not. I'm going to wash some clothes. I'm going to do some tidying. I'm going to get out for a wee bit. I do have to reply to a couple of emails and sort out some stuff. But yeah, and I'm going to take it easy tonight. I'm going to, whatever I do, like I'm trying to get into the habit that come like 6 o'clock, I don't do anything unless I really want to do it, because otherwise my temptation is to work from like 8 until 12 every day. Bruno says, I'm going to dig some holes in insulation on purpose. Interesting. We are on the get electric lines in part of the shed building. Oh, so you're kind of making holes all the way from the interior to the exterior, and then the lines come in, and then presumably you're filling that. That sounds good. Ian's doing a lot of rehearsals and getting costuming done. That sounds like fun. I hope both of you have a super wonderful time. And at this point, recap and wrap up before we finish up. And If you have any final comments, please do get it in at this point. So to recap and wrap up, we have been pondering mechanics, and we've been talking about acting, and I just complained it's a brand new series. I think this is valuable. I think this is a great book. I think that what Geoff Engelstein and Isaac Shalev have done with saying, let's really talk about the building blocks of tabletop game design, because if you understand these things, then we will understand better how to put them together to make games. That's great. But there's not enough thinking about the types of mechanisms for party games. It's mainly for strategic games. I think that the Board Game Geek bias is also the same as the bias in terms of what types of games books get written about. And as I said, building blocks of tabletop game design, Jeff Warrender's book, it's mainly based on Euro stuff. This mechanism wasn't even defined in the book, and acting, it's really badly categorized. Most games do not fall into this. Dixit, Two Rooms and a Boom, Spyfall, they are not using mime or mimicry. That, if this is the description, then no, that's not what it is. Really, we had acting as a pitch to the judge, which who would win, or indeed channel A. We have acting as role-playing, which it makes sense. That feels like what acting should be, like High Dark Overlords, Cash and Guns Live. And then like Buga, which is really about quick thinking and memory. Like these are, it's the state of Board Game Geek. Things get badly organized. And acting as a communication restriction, which feels like fundamentally that's the way that it's used. Architect, hitting people, putting pictures together, in Pantone, limited words, no words, just actions, drawing. And then we talked about an Abbey, which is apparently using a communication limits, which is something that I'll get into in a wee bit. We talked about there being different forms of restrictions, limited words, pictures, inflections, noises, gestures. It impacts the game a lot. Ultimately, none of this matters because it's just really badly defined, and I'm going to finish up at this point. If we assume that it is as it was originally intended to be more of a charades thing, then it's not that versatile. It doesn't fit loads of games. It's overpowered. It's almost like this is what the game has to be about, and you can't have a lot else. It's good for getting people out of their shell, big party game, getting people to know about each other, getting people to do something different. It's problematic for people who are a bit more shy and retiring. And I used it in a game about wee whimsical creatures and trying to identify the monster makes noises, according to the fact that it is listed on the list. There we go. So that is my recap and wrap up. So going back to what we're up to, Runa is basically making tunnels to put the pipes in. When the lines are in, the wood is going on top. Cool. I hope you have a wonderful day and manage to build a good shed. And everyone else, I hope you manage to act well or do whatever. And have a wonderful day. Lots of love. And as always, if you want to check me out, I am Stuff by Bez in all the places. Stuffbybez.com/streams will give you an idea of what I'm going to chat about for the next few days. Tomorrow is going to be a super quick show. I am going to be cycling. I'll stream from on location, which is just code for I won't be in my house. And stuffbybeds.com/Discord if you want to check out my Discord. Otherwise, stuffbybeds.com, stuffbybeds everywhere on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Twitch, blah, blah. Share, spread the word, please. Thank you very much. Always lovely to have you. And the only thing left to say at this point is lots of love and thank you. Bye, 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye, 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye-bye, everyone.